The title of Duke of Rothesay and the other Scottish titles which I've had the honour to carry for so long, I now pass to Catherine.
The room fell silent before King Charles even began speaking. His prepared statement remained untouched on the table, his hand resting beside it as Catherine and William waited across from him. Then came the declaration that would redefine the royal family. Charles was stepping away from his final public leadership role and formally crowning Catherine as the family's new leader. It was not abdication. It was something more personal, and, inside the palace, far more explosive. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned them to Buckingham Palace without warning. Catherine arrived beside William, believing the gathering concerned a reduced public schedule. Camilla entered with Anne, while Edward and Sophie followed, each expecting a difficult discussion about the king's duties. Instead, he looked directly at Catherine and announced that his final major public role would be a ceremonial appearance, recognizing her as the royal family's new guiding leader. The ceremony would not make her sovereign, it would entrust her with the family's unity, internal direction, and future image when every private fracture threatened to become a national crisis. Catherine lowered her eyes and gripped the edge of her chair. The words sounded like an honor, yet she felt the burden beneath them. She would be expected to calm rivalries, protect Charles's legacy, and prepare the household for William's future without appearing to seize power. When she tried to answer, her voice faltered. William watched her with pride, but concern tightened his expression. He understood why his father trusted her, yet he knew the role could place his wife at the center of every dispute before either was ready. Camilla did not move at first. Then she slowly removed her glasses, placed them beside the briefing papers, and asked whether the decision had already been finalized. Charles answered by lifting a signed family directive, a formal internal instruction explaining Catherine's authority in plain terms. The Queen Consort looked toward him again, and the shock hardened into something more personal. Anne noticed it. Sophie noticed it too. Edward remained silent, but his eyes stayed fixed on the sealed page beneath the directive. Charles drew a breath and reached for it. His hand trembled. Anne saw the movement and understood that the announcement was not only about Catherine's rise. The king was preparing to reveal the private reason he no longer trusted rank alone to hold the family together. And when that sealed page was finally opened, the family would discover why Charles believed Catherine, not William, not Camilla, and not himself, had become the one person capable of holding them together. Catherine had spent years learning how to stand beside the crown without appearing to reach for it. Now the crown had moved toward her. Yet behind the composure was a woman who understood exactly what royal leadership could take from a family. Charles had chosen her because she inspired trust, but that trust came with a brutal price. She would be expected to heal wounds she had not created and carry loyalties already beginning to fracture. Catherine had once entered royal life as an outsider, measured by every word, every silence, and every mistake. Over time, that scrutiny changed into something far more powerful. Courtiers began turning to her when tempers rose, when illness created uncertainty, and when public pressure threatened to expose private divisions. She had become the person people trusted to calm a room without humiliating anyone inside it. That trust mattered, because the royal family was no longer facing one simple crisis. Separate households had developed separate loyalties, old resentments remained unresolved, and every disagreement carried the danger of becoming public. Charles understood that danger better than anyone. He did not want his final public act remembered as a farewell shaped by weakness. He wanted it to become a bridge between his reign and William's future, ensuring that emotional continuity survived, even if the family's internal relationships did not. The monarchy's constitutional structure, the formal system deciding who holds sovereign power, would remain unchanged. Catherine's role was different. She was being asked to protect the human bonds beneath the institution, and that responsibility could prove even harder than wearing a crown. Catherine waited until she and William were alone before admitting what frightened her. She told him that his relatives might stop speaking to her as family, and begin treating every conversation as a test of authority. Some would see service, others would see ambition. William took her hand and answered carefully. He feared resentment too, but his deeper fear was that she would once again ignore her own limits, carry everyone else's pain, and call that sacrifice duty. She looked at him without answering, and the silence between them revealed how well he understood her. Camilla carried a different fear. Charles insisted that Catherine's leadership was familial rather than constitutional, yet the queen consort could not ignore what the declaration suggested. The woman beside William was being placed at the emotional center of the family, while she was left wondering whether her own influence was quietly shrinking. The king tried to reassure her, but she heard uncertainty beneath his words, and he saw the hurt she was trying to hide. Anne found Catherine in the corridor soon afterward. The Princess Royal spoke quietly, telling her that Charles had not chosen the loudest person in the family. He had chosen the one people still listened to after the doors closed. Catherine absorbed the support, but William remained uneasy. He had already seen an earlier draft of his father's plan, and he knew the final version contained a condition she had not yet been told about. Catherine believed the greatest danger was how the family would react to her authority, but the real danger lay in the hidden condition Charles had attached to it, and the moment that forced him to write it. The decision had not begun in a council chamber or inside a folder of constitutional advice. It began 3 months earlier, at a memorial service where the royal family was expected to appear united. Instead, Charles watched a carefully managed ceremony begin to fracture behind closed doors. One conversation, overheard in a side room after the service, convinced him that titles alone could no longer protect the monarchy from the divisions growing inside his own family. Pressure had been building for months. Separate royal households were competing over appearances, public messages, precedence, and access to Charles as his schedule became more limited. Precedence meant the formal order deciding who stands, speaks, or appears first during royal duties, but inside the family, it had become more than protocol. It had become a measure of influence. Catherine had repeatedly stepped between senior figures before those tensions reached the public, calming arguments and redirecting anger before aides, guests, or cameras could sense the fracture. The breaking point came after a memorial service at St. George's Chapel. Camilla and William entered a side room believing they were alone. She argued that, during future family crises, the queen consort should speak first for the king. The prince replied that responsibility would eventually fall to him and that mixed instructions were already confusing staff. Their voices sharpened. Then Catherine walked in. She closed the door behind her and told them, calmly but firmly, that protecting Charles had to matter more than protecting individual positions. Charles stood beyond the partially open door. He had arrived unnoticed, and every word struck him harder than the argument itself. He heard Catherine tell Camilla that loyalty was not measured by who spoke first. He heard her remind William that preparing to become king did not give him the right to turn every crisis into a test of succession. The monarch remained still, shaken by how quickly the disagreement had exposed wounds the family had spent years hiding. Charles found Catherine later and asked why she had intervened. The question came during a private recorded conversation preserved in his personal family notes. She answered that the monarchy could not ask the public to believe in unity while its own members treated every duty as territory. Her words carried no triumph. They carried exhaustion. He saw that she had been holding tensions together long before anyone had formally asked her to do it. Charles summoned Anne that same night. In a secret meeting documented by his private secretary, he admitted the chapel incident had changed everything. The Princess Royal listened as her brother said the family needed an emotional leader who could command respect without demanding submission. Anne did not flatter him. She told him Catherine already held that role. The only question was whether he had the courage to acknowledge it. Charles then wrote the sealed condition. Catherine would accept authority over family disputes immediately, even when those disputes involved William or Camilla. He knew the clause could wound pride, expose resentment, and provoke open resistance. Yet he also knew silence had already brought the family to the edge. That confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. when Camilla demanded to know whether Catherine's new authority would allow her to overrule the queen inside the family Charles had placed in her hands. The most dangerous royal arguments rarely begin with shouting. They begin with a door closing. Inside Charles's private sitting room, Catherine faced Camilla across a narrow table, while the king remained between them. There were no secretaries, no prepared statements, and no polished smiles. Camilla wanted one answer. Had Charles empowered Catherine to lead the family, or to replace her? Catherine's response would determine whether the new order began with unity or an unforgivable rupture. Camilla had requested the meeting the moment the sealed condition was read. She wanted no aides present and no carefully softened explanation. Charles agreed, knowing the discussion could no longer be delayed. Catherine's authority covered family coordination, reconciliation, public unity, and decisions during internal crises. In plain terms, she had been asked to help settle disputes before they damaged the monarchy. The queen consort would keep her ceremonial position beside the king and remain his wife, but the emotional direction of the wider family would now pass through another woman. Camilla leaned forward and asked Catherine the question directly. Would she ever countermand one of her decisions? The word countermand meant to challenge or reverse an instruction already given, and its meaning hung heavily between them. Catherine understood the trap. Reassurance might calm the room, but it would also make the role meaningless. Honesty could wound Camilla, yet anything less would betray the responsibility Charles had placed in her hands. Catherine chose honesty. She said that if any decision threatened the family's unity or went against Charles's wishes, she would speak against it, regardless of who had made it. Her voice remained quiet, but the answer landed with force. Camilla stared at her, then turned toward the king and accused him of creating a new hierarchy inside their marriage. She asked whether affection, loyalty, and years beside him now counted for less than Catherine's ability to calm a divided room. Charles set down his pen. The small gesture ended every illusion that he could avoid the pain. He told Camilla that affection could not decide what the monarchy needed next. The words hurt him as he said them, and she heard that hurt, but it did not soften the blow. He loved her. He also believed the family required someone who could stand between rival loyalties without being consumed by them. Catherine then did what neither expected. She offered to refuse the role. She told Charles that if he was using her to settle old resentments, punish Camilla, or correct wounds from his past, she would walk away before the ceremony began. She would serve the family, but she would not become a weapon against the queen consort. The king looked at her with shock, while Camilla's expression briefly changed from anger to uncertainty. Catherine extended her hand. Camilla looked at it, then rose and left without accepting it. The door closed behind her. Charles remained silent for several seconds before telling Catherine that the hardest resistance would not come from the public. It would come from those who believed leadership had been taken from them. But Charles had not acted from emotion alone, and the machinery behind his decision was already moving through the palace, placing real influence into Catherine's hands before anyone could stop it. The ceremony was designed to look symbolic. The documents behind it were not. While the public would see Charles honoring Catherine, palace officials were receiving new instructions about who would coordinate the family during moments of crisis. Invitations, private meetings, reconciliation efforts, and joint appearances would now pass through a structure shaped by her judgment. The crown remained with Charles. The future belonged to William. But the family itself was being placed under Catherine's steady command. Charles had built a practical framework around the announcement. Catherine would chair private family meetings, coordinate responses when disputes threatened to become public, and advise the king on which disagreements required his direct intervention. A family directive was an internal royal instruction, setting out responsibilities without changing the constitutional line of succession. That distinction mattered. She was not becoming sovereign, and William was not being displaced. Yet she was receiving real influence over the relationships that could either strengthen the monarchy or tear it apart from within. William supported the arrangement, but his father deliberately excluded him from certain decisions. Charles knew Catherine's authority would be dismissed as borrowed power if every judgment appeared to come through her husband. The prince accepted that logic, though it unsettled him. He wanted to protect her, yet protection now required stepping back and allowing her to stand alone when the pressure arrived. Charles signed the final directive in his study with Anne beside him. He paused when the pen reached Catherine's name, then admitted that he was giving away the one responsibility he had never imagined surrendering: the duty of holding the family together. The Princess Royal watched her brother struggle with the words. She reminded him that control and leadership were not the same. He was not admitting defeat, she said. He was choosing continuity before pride made that choice impossible. Edward and Sophie offered cautious support during a separate private discussion recorded in the household notes. The trusted confidant believed Catherine possessed the emotional intelligence to speak firmly without making others feel conquered. Edward agreed, but he worried the change would deepen Camilla's isolation. He knew the queen consort had already begun to feel that every new responsibility given to Catherine was proof that her own place was shrinking. Charles had also arranged one final public ceremony. He would place a historic family emblem into Catherine's hands, not a constitutional crown, but a symbol of guardianship, continuity, and service. The gesture would show that she had been entrusted with the family's emotional future without altering the throne itself. For Catherine, that difference mattered. She did not want glory. She wanted clarity. Then the control vanished. A missing draft was discovered inside the palace records, and fragments of the directive appeared outside the household before the ceremony could be announced. Someone had leaked the plan. Charles understood the danger immediately. Catherine would now be judged before she had spoken, Camilla would be portrayed as defeated, and William would be forced to defend a structure he had been told not to control. By sunrise, the secret was no longer contained within palace walls, and Catherine's first day as the family's chosen leader began not with celebration, but with betrayal. Catherine learned about the leak from William's face. He entered the room holding his phone, but for several seconds he said nothing. The internal directive had reached the press, stripped of its careful language and transformed into a declaration that Catherine had been elevated above Camilla. Within minutes, palace offices were exchanging accusations, commentators were predicting a royal fracture, and the woman chosen to preserve unity was being blamed for destroying it before her role had officially begun. William finally placed the phone in her hand. The headline claimed Charles had made Catherine the true leader of the royal family, turning a carefully limited role into an apparent transfer of power. Constitutional power meant the legal authority attached to the sovereign and the line of succession, while her position concerned family coordination and unity. The distinction should have protected everyone involved. Instead, the leak erased it, making Catherine look triumphant, Camilla look defeated, and the king look as though he had secretly rewritten the monarchy. Catherine read the headline twice. Then she locked the phone and told William she would step aside. She refused to let Charles's final public appearance become a battle over her status, especially when his intention had been to create peace. The prince reacted with immediate anger. He told her that withdrawing would reward the person who had leaked the directive and prove that humiliation could force her away from responsibility. She answered that protecting the king mattered more than proving her strength, but he insisted that surrender would only deepen the crisis. Charles refused to deny the central decision. Palace communications teams struggled to produce a unified response because every possible statement carried danger. A denial would undermine the monarch's own directive. Confirmation could fuel claims that Camilla had been pushed aside. Advisors argued over every sentence, while the story spread faster than they could contain it. The king listened, then rejected language that made Catherine's role sound empty, simply to reduce public pressure. Camilla felt the walls close around her when members of her staff were questioned about the disclosure. No evidence connected them to the leak, yet suspicion followed them because she had openly challenged the arrangement. The queen consort sat alone after the interviews and understood how cruel the story had become. Her hurt was now being used as motive, and her silence was being treated as guilt. Then the missing draft was confirmed. A copy had vanished from a secure folder containing Charles's earliest plans, written before Catherine had formally accepted the role. That detail changed everything. The person responsible had access before the final announcement, before the sealed condition was revealed, and before the confrontation with Camilla. The betrayal had begun inside the palace, long before the family realized it was under attack. Charles called Catherine himself. His voice was controlled, but the strain beneath it was unmistakable. He ordered everyone else from the room, including William, because he wanted one private conversation before deciding whether the ceremony would proceed. With the palace turning against itself, Charles and Catherine were finally left alone, and what he confessed in that room changed her understanding of the role forever. For the first time since the announcement, there were no advisors, no competing households, and no documents between them. Charles sat opposite Catherine and admitted that the ceremony was not simply about reorganizing the family. It was his attempt to prevent his own regrets from becoming William's inheritance. He had spent too many years believing fractured relationships could be repaired later. Now, facing the limits of time, he was asking Catherine to succeed where he believed he had failed. Charles spoke without the language of duty that usually protected him. He confessed that the confrontation at St. George's Chapel had forced him to face a painful truth. The family had mistaken silence for peace, and delay for reconciliation. A royal household was more than offices and titles. It was the network of people, staff, and relationships surrounding the sovereign. When those relationships broke down, the institution itself became weaker. He had watched disagreements harden because no one wanted to confront them, and he feared those wounds would eventually fall into William's hands. Catherine listened with sadness, not triumph. Charles explained that he had chosen her because she still held the trust of William, Anne, Edward, Sophie, and much of the public, without building influence through fear. She could challenge people without humiliating them. She could calm conflict without pretending it did not exist. The king admitted that this was the kind of authority he had often struggled to create, and the confession left him exposed in a way no public speech ever had. Charles then said what frightened him most. William might one day inherit the crown, but he could also inherit every unresolved grievance wrapped around it. The crown meant the sovereign's formal authority, and the burden passed from one monarch to the next. Yet the emotional damage surrounding that authority could become just as dangerous as any constitutional crisis. He did not want his son's reign to begin under the weight of problems everyone had been too proud to solve. Catherine answered carefully. She could not promise to repair every relationship, and she would not pretend that one ceremony could erase years of hurt. She could only promise to reject the habit of hiding damage until it became impossible to contain. Charles nodded, then revealed that he had personally written the sealed condition. He wanted her empowered to challenge even William if the future king ever allowed pride, anger, or pressure to endanger the family's unity. Catherine finally agreed, but she set two conditions of her own. Charles must publicly define her role as service, not superiority, and he must privately assure Camilla that she had not been erased. The king accepted without hesitation. He rose slowly, took Catherine's hand, and told her that his last public duty would not elevate her above the family. It would place the family's future within her care. When the palace doors opened the next morning, Charles was ready to explain his decision to the world. And the world was already waiting to judge Catherine's first step. By morning, the decision belonged to everyone. Broadcasters debated whether Catherine had become the monarchy's most powerful figure without wearing the crown. Newspapers framed the moment as either Charles's greatest act of foresight or a devastating humiliation for Camilla. Yet beyond the noise, one image captured the public mood: hundreds gathering outside Buckingham Palace, waiting beneath a silent balcony for a ceremony no modern royal family had ever attempted. The first front pages deepened the shock. One newspaper placed Catherine's face beneath the headline, "The King's Final Choice," while a smaller photograph showed Camilla leaving the earlier meeting alone. BBC News opened its morning coverage by calling the event a transfer of family leadership without a transfer of the throne. The phrase mattered because the throne still belonged to Charles, and William remained next in line. What had changed was the emotional authority inside the family, the power to guide, reconcile, and steady the people behind the institution. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace long before the announcement. Some carried flowers for Charles, thanking him for what they believed was a final act of service. Others held handwritten messages for Catherine, praising the calm she had shown during years of private strain and public uncertainty. The gathering was not simply about ceremony. It reflected a deeper hunger for stability after repeated divisions had made the monarchy feel fragile. Catherine watched the coverage for only a few minutes. Then she turned off the television and looked at William. She did not ask whether the public approved. She asked whether the family was ready. The prince understood the difference. Public applause could disappear within hours, but one unresolved wound inside the palace could poison the role before it began. He told her that readiness might not come before the ceremony. It might have to begin because of it.
It might have to begin because of it.
Camilla reached her own decision behind closed doors. Charles spoke to her alone and assured her that Catherine's rise did not erase the life, loyalty, or duty they shared. The queen consort listened without interrupting. She still carried hurt, but she also understood that refusing to attend would turn private pain into a public rupture. After a long silence, she agreed to stand beside the family. Charles prepared the object that would define the moment, a historic silver family brooch. It was not a crown and carried no constitutional power. It symbolized guardianship, continuity, and service, the duty to protect the family rather than rule above it. That meaning gave Catherine comfort. It also gave Camilla a reason to remain. The doors were almost ready to open. Charles waited in silence. Catherine stood several steps away, steady but tense. Then Camilla moved unexpectedly to her side. No speech followed. None was needed. Then Charles stepped forward for the final public role he had chosen for himself. And with one deliberate gesture, years of rivalry, fear, and uncertainty were given their answer. Charles did not place a crown upon Catherine's head. He placed something heavier into her hands, the responsibility to keep a family united when history, pride, and pain threatened to pull it apart. Before the assembled household and a watching nation, the king declared that leadership was not always inherited through rank. Sometimes, it was earned through patience, sacrifice, and the ability to remain steady when everyone else had begun choosing sides. Charles publicly named Catherine the royal family's guiding leader, entrusting her with the responsibility to strengthen unity, protect relationships, and prepare the household for William's future reign. The title carried no constitutional power, meaning it did not alter who occupied the throne or who would inherit it. Instead, it recognized a different kind of authority, the trust to confront private fractures before they became public disasters. The monarch spoke slowly because every word marked both an ending and a beginning. His final major duty would not preserve his control. It would prepare the family to survive without depending on it. Charles lifted the silver guardianship brooch and fastened it to Catherine's coat. The historic emblem represented protection, continuity, and service rather than sovereign rule. When his hand briefly rested over hers, Catherine understood the sacrifice behind the gesture. He was not simply honoring her strength. He was admitting that the family needed something he could no longer provide alone. Catherine stepped forward and rejected the language of power. She promised to serve Charles, support Camilla, stand beside William, and challenge the silence that had allowed resentment to deepen. She would not lead by demanding loyalty. She would earn it by listening, confronting pain honestly, and refusing to let private rivalries become the inheritance of the next generation. Her words transformed the ceremony from a victory into a vow. Camilla then ended the final uncertainty. The queen consort moved toward Catherine and embraced her, showing that the new arrangement did not require one woman to rise through another woman's defeat. She retained her place beside the king, while Catherine accepted responsibility for holding the wider family together. The fear of a winner and a loser finally lost its power. William watched his father and wife with visible emotion. The prince understood that Charles had given him more than a future institution. He had given him a partner empowered to protect the people inside it. The leaked directive could no longer divide them because its meaning had been defined publicly through service, not superiority. Charles's final role did not reveal the collapse of his authority. It revealed its depth. By choosing Catherine, he accepted that the monarchy depended not only on crowns, succession, and ceremony, but on trust. She replaced no one. She became the bond between them. The king secured his legacy, William gained a stronger foundation, Camilla kept her dignity, and Catherine accepted the duty that would shape the family's next era. The monarchy emerged changed, but not broken, united, steadied, and finally prepared for what came next. As the applause rose and Charles stepped back, his final public duty was complete. He had not merely honored Catherine, he had entrusted the heart of the monarchy to the one person he believed could keep it beating. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.